So we got a good one for you today. A lot of the methods we've been going over from The Power of Your Subconscious Mind, Chapter 6, Practical Techniques and Mental Healings by Joseph Murphy. A lot of the methods we've been going over have probably been stuff you've already heard of, techniques that you're already very familiar with. And the point of me going over each part of this chapter, each technique, is just to kind of, give us a little more grounding in it, to ground us some in how deep and applicable each one of these various manifesting techniques can be if we want to utilize it. And again, the emphasis is if we want to utilize it. There is no one way. There's not one technique that works. You're going to find in your experiences that what works for you or what works for somebody else is going to be different a lot of the time. Our subjective sensibility has to take priority over a certain technique. That's just how mental and spiritual healing, how the law of attraction, manifesting, law of assumption, whatever you want to call it, how it works. It's a subjective practice. What works for you is not necessarily going to work for somebody else, and that's all good. The key is finding what does work for you. And again, that can change over time. There's going to be some days where a certain technique works better than another day. But the big picture is figure out what tends to work for you and then utilize it. Utilize it with regularity. All right? Most of the techniques we've gone over, you're already familiar with. Today's technique you might not be familiar with, even though you've utilized it and seen other people utilize it in your life plenty of times. I think you'll enjoy it. So this is called the argumentative method by Murphy in this chapter. And Murphy writes, this method is just what the word implies. It stems from the procedure of Dr. Phineas Parkhurst Quimby of Maine. Dr. Quimby, a pioneer in mental and spiritual healing, lived and practiced in Belfast, Maine about 100 years ago. A book called The Quimby Manuscripts, published in 1921 by Thomas W. Crowell Company, New York City, and edited by Horatio Dresser, is available in your library. This book gives newspaper accounts of this man's remarkable results in prayer treatment for the sick. Quimby duplicated many of the healing miracles recorded in the Bible. So, this is not something that I just read that should just be passed over, be like, oh, cool, this guy did this. Quimby is like, you could certainly make the argument that Quimby is really like the founding father of American spiritual and mental healing, or law of attraction, implementing law of attraction principles to many people and sharing them. He, for instance, had Mary Baker Eddy as a patient, and he was quite prolific in in New England in the, like Murphy said, 1840s, 1850s, 1860s. The Quimby Manuscripts is a book you can look at. There's also, at this point, there's other books on Quimby out there that might give you even a more full picture of the work he did. But Quimby is really like a giant in American spiritual healing. And you could really even say like an iconic figure in the American spiritual and psychological movement. He is an incredibly underrated figure. And I know people like Mitch Horowitz have talked about him, but in general, in law of attraction circles, if you mention Quimby, people aren't even going to know who you're talking about. So like when we're talking about the law of attraction, like we're not really talking about Abraham Hicks, who I like. I got nothing against Abraham Hicks. It's like we're really talking about Quimby. We're talking about Quimby. We're talking about Coué, who I know was a Frenchman, but nonetheless, his advice was, taken very well over here in the States. But yeah, Quimby's a huge figure. So that's worth mentioning, okay? So Murphy goes on to write, in brief, the argumentative method employed according to Quimby consists of spiritual reasoning where you convince the patient and yourself that his sickness is due to his false belief, groundless fears, and negative patterns lodged in his subconscious mind. Or one could say his imagination. So you could say imaginary false beliefs, groundless fears, and negative patterns grounded in your thinking, in your imagination, right? Murphy says, you reason it out clearly in your mind and convince your patient that the disease or ailment is due only to a distorted, twisted pattern of thought which has taken form in his body. This wrong belief in some external power and external causes has now externalized itself as sickness and can be changed by changing the thought patterns. Okay, again, this is the law of attraction. This is what it's all about, pretty much. Is wrongful thinking, you could say imaginative, our thinking is our imagination, negative, wrongful thinking that has made us ill, that we can, through correct, quote unquote, correct thinking, healthy thinking, can heal us, clear up this negativity and make us whole again. You can use whatever language you want. This should be pretty clear what Murphy is saying and what Quimby was saying. And obviously, you can not only do this with a patient, argue with a patient, you can argue with yourself. You can argue yourself to health. Okay? That's vitally important to understand. This is what it's all about. This is like fundamental, very important stuff to grasp. Murphy goes on to say, you explain to the sick person that the basis of all healing is a change of belief. You also point out that the subconscious mind created the body and all its organs. Therefore, it knows how to heal it, can heal it, and is doing so now as you speak. You argue in the courtroom of your mind that the disease is a shadow of the mind based on disease-soaked, morbid thought imagery. You continue to build up all the evidence you can muster on behalf of the healing power within, which created all the organs in the first place and which has a perfect pattern of every cell, nerve, and tissue within it. Again, this is like we were, recently talking about last video about how, your body has this life-giving principle. It wants to heal you if at all possible. It wants to make you better. It's life-giving. It's very life-giving. It's more life-giving than we consciously realize. So that is something that you can utilize to heal yourself or to heal somebody else. You make the argument to yourself or to somebody else that, listen, your body wants to heal you. Your thinking patterns, your imagination, set them right and your body will heal itself. This is what Coué is always talking about. And it's just doing it. And you can use this argumentative, persuasive, discussion to do it. Instead of being, passive and having your fear thoughts soak into your mind or soak into, your friend or patient's mind, you say, no, screw that. I am healing myself. I am speaking the truth. I am arguing against the bullshit in my head and in my body and speaking the truth, and I'm going to heal myself, or I'm going to heal that person. I'm going to help heal that person. Again, linking this all together with what I often talk about, this is why I love talking out loud to myself. Or if I'm talking to a client, I often will use this argumentative method. I was using this unknowingly. Before I knew about this method and just was dealing with like stress management stuff, I would often use this too. It's a natural, it's like a courtroom skill, right? Is basically saying either to yourself or to somebody else, convincing them that, listen, all these thoughts in your head are bullshit. What's real is right now, and it's good, it's health, it's wholeness, it's peace, it's prosperity, it's abundance, it's whatever the heck you want to call it. It's right now. Again, in the podcast, there's many examples of me leading meditations where we do this, but it can be meditational. It can also be kind of like strong and certain, argumentative in how you do this. I'm sure Quimby was a very persuasive person, charismatic, just like Coué was a very charismatic, hypnotic person, just like Neville was a very charismatic, theatrical, dramatically certain person. You see that certainty and it's conveyed. And you're like, oh, wow, they're right. My mind is full of shit. My imagination is making stuff up that's not helping me heal, but is actually hindering my healing. And I can heal. and I can heal myself. And, the teacher, whether it's Quimby or Coué or Neville or you, whoever, is helping you do that. They're persuading you to see the spiritual truth, you could call it, okay? Or, just the truth of life, the natural abundance of life. So this is huge. Murphy goes on to write, then you render a verdict in the courthouse of your mind in favor of yourself or your patient. You liberate the sick one by faith and spiritual understanding. Your mental and spiritual evidence is overwhelming. There being but one mind, what you feel is true will be resurrected in the experience of the patient. This procedure is essentially the argumentative method used by Dr. Quimby of Maine from 1849 to 1869. So I hope that what we're talking about here, what Murphy was just explaining, is clear. Too often on places like YouTube, and then just when we hear people talking about LOA, the law of assumption, in these social media platforms, it's not clear, like what Murphy wrote here, that you explain to the sick person that the basis of all healing, at least spiritual healing, mental healing, right? The basis of all that healing is a change of belief. It's a change of belief. It's not about any rinky-dinky thing or how the stars are or whatever, anything outside of yourself. It's about a change of belief within you. And you can convince yourself or convince another person through authoritative certainty and through, arguing in a powerful and persuasive and helpful way. You can argue yourself to better health. Very, very powerful. All right. So, I hope you dug that. And it's something really worth considering. Quimby is also somebody who's worth checking out. So, if you have any questions, let me know. And I will see you later.